In this video series, we're going to be discussing how to break down those long sentences that you come across on the TOEFL or the IELTS. These kinds of exams do their best to make things seem more academic, make them seem a little bit more complicated and heavy, to make sure that you are fully prepared in an academic English-focused setting. So we'll be starting out with part one. Part one is a general breakdown. So we'll discuss 3 points about what you can think about when you're looking at breaking down long sentences. In part two and the later parts of the series, we'll be discussing more grammar and specific details for what you can look for as you're breaking down long sentences. So let's get started. So I've added a passage here from a TOEFL reading passage to kind of give us something to work with as we work through some of the points in this video. So the first point I want to discuss today is recognizing key details in a reading passage. You're going to have a lot of reading to do, and you might be worried about these long sentences that are all going to have long details and important points. You don't want to miss anything out. So what should you look for when you're looking at a long sentence, and how should you determine what's key? Well, let's look at sentence number one. This sentence is fairly long. It has lots of commas, clauses, so it kind of gives you that feel of how am I going to pull out what I need from here? Typically, key details will be dates, times, or names. So here we have 13th century, a time period, and we have a location, Mesoamerica, and then we follow this with a clause about where Mesoamerica is, south central area of currently Mexico. So when you're pulling out key details, what that is you're looking for, you could even scan quickly in your sentence. You see a number, you see anything with a capital letter, that will give you an idea that this is a key point, this is a name, this is a time, this is a location, and for some reason they're mentioning this, so I will likely need to know it. So let's look at the second sentence. These people were called the Aztecs. Okay, this isn't a long sentence, but again, we're able to pull out a key detail here, a name of a group of people. This next one is longer. It is said that upon their arrival at Lake Texcoco, they saw an eagle perch on a cactus and accepted it as a sign to settle there. So we have a location here that we can pull out as a key detail. And then we have something that was named as a sign, so like a small little blurb here. And we can leave that for now. 300 years later, this group of people had managed to establish a mighty empire, ruling over a population in the millions from their architecturally wondrous capital city of Tenochtitlan. Okay, so we have a time period again, 300 years later, so that's definitely a key detail. And this group of people managed to establish a mighty empire, ruling over a population in the millions. Anything that is numbering a group of people or any kind of thing at all will probably be important. It is certainly a key detail to make note of. And then we have the name of the capital city here. Okay, the next sentence, what made this possible was in part the Aztecs' ingenuity in agriculture. While they didn't enjoy the benefits of the wheel or the beast of burden, they still managed to use the land around the lakes of central Mexico to support their population through several methods. Okay, so for recognizing key details, what we've done here is pull out all the time periods and the names, the proper nouns that we need. So we have locations, we have time, we have names. What would that look like if we listed that out? Okay, so just from that first point here, we were able to pull this information from a series of long sentences. So most of the sentences in this passage are quite long. They have those clauses that make them seem more confusing and more difficult. But we were able to pull out this much information. 13th century, Mesoamerica, which is the south central area of Mexico, Aztecs, Lake Texcoco, 300 years later, population in the millions, the capital city's name, and central Mexico. So even if you just looked at this information, we're already starting to paint a fairly clear picture of what this whole passage is about. We have a time period, we have a development in a later time period, we have a pretty specific location because we have a part of a country, we have a lake mentioned specifically, and we have the name for who we're talking about. So what this does is it gives you a basis. You know, this is the general idea. This is my outline for what's being discussed in these long sentences. And it can also make you feel much more confident and stronger about the information that you're taking in. Okay, so maybe I don't understand every single word in every single one of these long sentences, but I already have an idea. And chances are, if you're studying for one of these tests, you will have studied some of these topics in your own language, and then you're able to connect those as well. So this can help make these long sentences far less difficult and far less intimidating. Okay, now let's take a look at point number 2. What's important versus what's not. Now, for this one, especially when you're talking about taking an exam, it's hard to say for sure immediately off the bat what's important and what's not. What I mean by this is there will be a lot of information given to you in these long sentences, in these passages, but you won't need all of it. And you can't know for sure what you will or will not need until you know the questions. So if you find yourself getting frustrated by breaking down long sentences, then take a look at the questions, and in that way you can kind of get rid of parts of sentences that you may not need. So for example, looking through this paragraph, if I were to read all of the questions that I won't list here because it would just take up our whole screen, so you can just trust me on this one, you would see that there's no questions asking you about why they decided to settle at this location. So we have that they arrived at Lake Texcoco, but it doesn't ask why they decided to settle there or if they saw a sign. So this kind of information here in your long sentence is not necessary. So what we've just done by looking at the questions and determining that I don't need this information is we've taken a long sentence and broken it in half. So we have this information here, and it is interesting why they decided to settle there, seeing the eagle on the cactus. However, it's not what you need, and it's not necessarily important for this specific question or this section of the exam. So now we just have this nice simple sentence. It is said that upon their arrival at Lake Texcoco, so the only information we need here is the name of this lake. So for what's important, what's not, what that really means is make sure you take a look at your questions because it'll help you break down these long sentences. If I don't need this information, then I can kind of pull it out and focus just on what I do need, and that makes a long sentence much shorter and easier to tackle. Finally, let's discuss academic wordiness. What I mean by this is that in the exam, they're going to be making everything as academic and as educational as possible. So there'll be times where a sentence is taking a long time to say what is essentially fairly simple. Let's look at an example of this. I think this sentence here is a good example of a long sentence that's more wordy and academic than it really needs to be to get the basic point across. 300 years later, this group of people had managed to establish a mighty empire, ruling over a population in the millions from their architecturally wondrous capital city of Tenochtitlan. So here we have all of this information, but it really isn't all that information if you look at it. We already pulled out the key details, the time, the population, and the name of the capital city. Everything else in here is essentially just a long-winded way of getting to this point. So you know you're talking about the Aztecs. So this just basically equals Aztecs. And had managed to establish a mighty empire. Honestly, the only thing important here is that they worked hard and they founded a empire. So we could really just get rid of all of this. And then we've got mighty empire here. Ruling over a population in the millions. Okay, this is all important, so we'll keep that. From their architecturally wondrous capital city of Tenochtitlan. Again, it's good to know that they have a very nice capital city and that they built it up so that it's very wondrous. However, this is just pretty academically wordy, and we can focus on the important information, which is the name of their capital city. So once you do step one and you recognize those key details, this gives you a basis so that when you're looking at a sentence like this one that takes up 4 lines of a reading and seems long and confusing and has commas and big words, you're able to break it down and focus on just what you need. 300 years later, the Aztecs had a mighty empire with a large population that they ruled from their capital city, and then there's the name. So by looking at just what's key detail and what's not, by pulling out those fancy, long-winded academic wordings that are really just saying something very simple, you can take a long sentence and reduce it to something short and sweet and simple. What they're essentially saying is this: in a time period of 300 years, the Aztecs ruled a strong, large empire from their capital city named Tenochtitlan. So the whole point of this is to make sure that you'll be prepared for those academic texts that do word them more long and more difficult, and they use those big words. But as long as you're able to focus on just what's important and get rid of those wordy phrases that make everything sound academic, but don't make it easy on you when you're trying to quickly read a reading passage, then you're able to pull out everything that's important and then shorten those long sentences to make them more bite-sized and easier to handle. All of this also helps to make you feel more confident. If you feel when you look at a reading, these sentences are too long, this is too stressful, I can't do it, then your brain is going to have a harder time focusing. You might get nervous, you might forget how hard you studied and all the things that you learned while studying. But if you go in ready with these strategies, okay, I can break down this passage this way. Oh, this is a really long sentence, so I need to go step 1, 2, 3, and now it's not so long, it's not so difficult anymore. And breaking down these long sentences can be hugely advantageous for you and a huge help and a big step towards making you feel confident and sure of yourself as you tackle long sentences on the exam or anywhere else in your academic or professional career in English.